Hi, this is Roger Christian, and you're listening to the FSF podcast.
Hello and welcome to the FSF podcast. I'm Tim, I'm your host. Today we proudly welcome an industry icon, Academy Award winner Roger Christian, to our show. Now, you may best know Roger for his work on movies such as Alien, Monty Python's Life of Brian, one of my personal favorites. I'm not the Messiah. Anyway, Battlefield Earth, and then there's, of course, Star Wars, A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, and A Phantom Menace, which, yeah, Star Wars, it's a thing. So anyway, I am very, very excited to welcome Roger Christian to the FSF podcast. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Thank you. Very great to be here, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Oh, thank you. So, hey, Roger, you had a documentary made called Galaxy Built on Hope. And by the way, thank you for sending us the screener on that. That was a lot of fun to watch. Anytime I get to watch something about Star Wars and how it was made and kind of peel back some of the layers on how my favorite galaxy came to life is always a fun time for me. So, yeah, I really did appreciate that. But what I was hoping you would do is take a moment or two to explain the premise of the documentary, and how it came to be and why people should watch it.
Yeah, sure. I go back a bit to David West Reynolds, who was the original head of literature at Skywalker. And I met him at the picnic that was always held in July at the ranch when I was directing second unit on Phantom Menace. And he came running down to me and said, Roger, I need to ask you questions. I've gone through all the archives. There's no interview with you. You're not mentioned in any of the making of Star Wars documentaries, the official ones. And yet everything I look at comes back to you. So he kind of put the pressure on me to write the book, Cinema Alchemist. And so I actually took a year off and wrote it. And the head of literature after him, John Rinsler, who's brilliant, who wrote the beautiful making of Star Wars books, he edited it for me into a book that is out now, that's still out on Amazon. And David continued his pressure on me because nothing had been done. And he said, it's a legacy. And everything that started on Star Wars, everything on that first movie that has gone through all of them, it should be documented for fans because everybody is interested. So I couldn't get any official backing. It was a bit like making the first movie. Oh, is that your dog?
It's Ben's.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, yes, it's not mine. Mine's gone deaf, so she's gone quiet. So I managed to get a producer here, financier, Ritu Shada, and a financier in LA, Stephen Neer. They put up a small budget for me to go and make it. And I was going to interview people all over the world and do all of the usual stuff. And what happened? COVID struck. So I was landlocked in Canada. They wouldn't allow us in or anybody, they wouldn't allow me out or anybody in. So I found a virtual studio in Toronto that made children's programs so I could link in by satellite. I had guests who were with me actually in the studio, and I could interview them and talk directly live to them. And so I thought, you know what, let's do it. So an editor and I actually spent a year alone, the two of us, making this thing with interviews going on in between and filming ourselves, everything we did ourselves. It was like making the first film with no money. But I managed, and everybody said, because I've done events and, lectured students and stuff, and everyone said they really wanted me to tell the stories in my own voice. So that's what we decided to do. I had a few props and lightsaber and Han Solo's gun, and I had a Comcast somebody had made for me, and lots of other things like that. So I thought we should make it, and then to go deeper into the mythology, because I go through all of the, to me, George's made a new legend or a myth for the cinema age. That's why it's connected globally. And I wanted to go into all of that. I know a great friend is Guillermo del Toro, and he wanted to be in it. And because of COVID, he was shooting here. He said, if you can be alone with me outside the studio, we can do it. I can't have assistants. We can't do anything. We're not allowed. So he and I met with one cameraman who did the sound. We had a boom mic. He held the boom for me when I spoke, and I held it for him when he spoke. We did it the same kind of the same spirit. But Guillermo is very erudite and had some very interesting views on Star Wars, which and also it made him become a director. He saw it once in the cinema. I didn't know what it was, and went round the block 4 times and kept seeing it and couldn't understand how anyone could make a film like this, and that made him want to be a director. The other one I really wanted, because I really liked Rogue One, and Gareth has become a friend, and I think to me Rogue One was the most kind of Star Wars like prequel.
It's fantastic.
And so Gareth is throughout, he's kind of the idea behind each of the segments that we go into, and what he is saying and talking about his influence, and what in a way most fans think he's able to voice that. And then I also had Carl Newman, who made the Fanboys and the recent holiday special documentary. So I had some really interesting people who just wanted to be part of it, to show their appreciation and their understanding of Star Wars. So all of this came together, and we did it ourselves. As I said, the sound house I work with here is the best in Canada. They just put me in the main studio, and we did the sound. I did whatever I could to make it work.
Yeah, it's a fantastic documentary, and I do love the inclusion of your guests. Both Del Toro and Gareth Edwards had such great input on their own personal, not only just their own personal experiences, but how it's that work has impacted their work. And having just recently interviewed Kyle Newman ourselves, it was kind of cool to see him on another documentary talking about Star Wars, knowing how big of a Star Wars fan he is,
Yes.
um, and everything else. So, and for me, this was fantastic to see all the things that you guys created back in the 70s on like a nickel's budget, that are still being used today in different forms of cinema, and things that were made back then, because like, oh yeah, we could make that work. I think that would look kind of cool, and it's
Yeah.
still being used in Star Wars today because they've become iconic images. So yeah, it's a really cool, really cool documentary. And personally, I strongly suggest anybody who's watching, if you haven't had a chance to see Galaxy Built on Hope, it's a wonderful visit of over 2 hours into the Star Wars world.
Yeah, they're trying to sell it now. I mean, little things like, there was the Mos Eisley Cantina
Hmm.
should be the kind of desert look that Ralph McQuarrie had originally painted, and which John Barry had brought Tunisia to be used for Tatooine. And right there, right on that angle where they cross into, there was an olive tree. Now, this is poor farmers. We couldn't go and cut it down. So we built a crashed spaceship that's as big as a Boeing 747. John did, and I took down bits of Death Star panels and broke them down with an old blowtorch and made it look old and crashed. No one really notices, but it's there. If you think every single Star Wars movie since then has had crashed spaceships as very much a part of the whole
Hmm.
look of Star Wars, right to the latest ones. I mean, she's living in one, Ray. So
Right. Yeah.
it's little things, yeah, that I was able to get to explain.
I enjoyed the explanation of, because I always curious why we had blue milk and there was the blue milk explanation, and there's the creation of Luke's lightsaber and how that came to be, and and I always knew that was a photo accessory. And by the way, I was talking with my buddy Roe over at the Scarif podcast, and he wanted me to tell you that every time he watches like old 1950s movies where they have the flash, he thinks
Yes.
of Star Wars, and so do I. Personally, I'm always like, look, honey, a Jedi, but
Right. Well, I think, when I was always very deeply immersed in myth, and King Arthur got me through childhood, basically. So I knew when I read that script that if anything would become the icon of Star Wars, it was a lightsaber. It was a brilliant kind of invention by George. And it took a lot of finding for me because I couldn't make anything. I didn't have the money to make anything in the workshops, and I had to find found objects for everything, including all the weapons. And to me, I took a lot of care because it's the mystical weapon of a Jedi.
Mhm.
This was something special, and the day that I found those Graflex handles, I found my own holy grail that day.
Yeah,
It,
I like your description in the documentary. You talk about you're taking off the lid, and it was like there it was, Excalibur, and the Lady in the
Yeah,
Lake,
yeah.
and it was just kind of cool. I was like, yeah, I can see that. So
No, it was a big moment. That would be music and slow motion. Exactly.
it is crazy the power that just swords have in myth. Not even just as they are as a weapon, but I mean, it really is just a King Arthur tale because it's a magic sword. It's just a handle that becomes a blade. And
Yeah.
I mean, I remember specifically when I was a kid building my own lightsaber at home. It might have been just a little aluminum tube and some glued on little like gemstones that I put on there,
Right.
but that was the weapon of a Jedi Knight. And it's
Yeah.
transcended since then as well.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the sword is almost the center of most myths and legends. That it comes up so many times again and again. And in fact, the poster behind me, Black Angel, which is the short film that I made that George commissioned that went out with um, Empire Strikes Back, has a sword fight in it. And I'm now about to go to Morocco to do a feature film inspired by it. And at the center of it is a sword that is destiny, part of the destiny of my lead character. So I'm
interesting.
continuing the my love of this kind of type of ancient mythology, which I really like. And George, his instructions to us were I'm making a documentary. I'm not making a feature film, and I'm making a spaghetti western in space. Well, every spaghetti western is based on a samurai Kurosawa movie, exactly the same plot and the look and everything. So he was my mentor, Kurosawa, and so it's very much behind what I'm doing again now with the new movie.
So, kind of to expand on a lot of what you just said, in the documentary, you talk about the importance of creating family entertainment and how George was driven to make moviegoing more of a family experience again and moving away from the more violent entertainment that kids were exposed to and still exposed to an extent. You just mentioned King Arthur. Can you talk about the importance of myth and legend and how your work in Star Wars and everything you've done since then, or before and since, uh, can you expand on that into
Yeah,
more of the myth
sure.
and legends?
Yeah, because there's a reason that these great legends from the Indian, Greece, from we had King Arthur, which is Europe, but there are ones from Gilgamesh. There are legends. There's a reason why they've remained globally with everybody, because they're essential kind of keys to who we are and to how we kind of grow up. And George studied mythology. George had the advantage that no other mythology writers or makers ever had. He had Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell mentored George. And Joseph Campbell, if anybody wants to know about him, just look up that name. He's the world's greatest mythologist. He spent his life studying myth, and he mentored George into how to construct a story that contained the elements of a myth that connect to the subconscious. They're not what you're watching, they're what you're absorbing from a movie. And George was able to do this with a modern audience in cinemas. And there are moments throughout the sagas that George created that adhere to those mythological moments. When you look at King Arthur, he was an orphan because Merlin took him when he was young and brought him up. If you look at most of the legends, they actually are orphaned. Certainly the ones that George was accessing. And so they show you how there comes a moment where you will meet your destiny. And most people don't meet that moment because their instinct isn't open, or they're surrounded by the voices from around them and everything. But if you connect, as Luke did, the moment aunt and uncle were killed, he'd already had met, by what looks like chance, Obi-Wan Kenobi. They were living on the same planet. He was living in a cave not that far away from Luke. And it's explained later in the TV series, but there was a reason he was there, and there's a reason how that all ties together. And then he goes to fulfill his destiny to become the hero. This is the hero's journey, and this is Joseph Campbell's major book is called Hero with a Thousand Faces, and that explains that there is actually one story. There is one mythological story. It's told in 1,000 different ways. George, because of all of that, and he studied mythology, and he was able to put it into a story for children, because most of these myths really appeal to the child, and they help you growing up, and they help you to find yourself, basically, if you are able to absorb it. There's an absolute reason why there's no other film in the history of cinema has connected to a global audience. You can go to China, you'll find a Star Wars doll in a back kind of peasant's house. There's a reason for it, because it connected to the world. And George was able to do that with cinema, which is a fantastic way to globally tell the story. So that's why I'm so kind of, it's not for my ego that I continue on the path of helping with Star Wars and everything. It's because the world needs it, especially now, the way the world is. It's not that good, and we need those stories. And and it's very touching. I met fans here not long ago at a convention, and one came and asked if I'd signed this lightsaber they'd made, and they were crying when I signed it. And I realized how much this has meant to everybody, and we need it as a human species. We need this to help us survive. And I explain in the documentary that, George is kind of, he said once he was Buddhist Methodist, but as you can tell that it's more and more Buddhist, the mindfulness, the all the things that are said by the knights. So in Return of the Jedi, I think that's where George's voice comes through, when Luke and Darth Vader, hating each other to the point where they want to kill each other, have the fight. and it builds up. It's a huge fight, and as is natural in the animal world, the young one gets the older one down. And at the moment he goes to kill him, he switches off the lightsaber and puts it down. And Darth Vader asks him to remove his breathing apparatus, which he knows will kill him anyway. And they're looking at each other in the eyes. And this is a moment where you think all there is left is love between them. It's the only word I could use. And that's George's message to the world, that forgiveness and compassion is what matters to humankind. And what so all of this I wanted to bring out in the documentary as well, so that people could look a little bit deeper and see, oh, there's connections here all along, if that helps to explain it.
Oh, absolutely. And
Absolutely, it does.
I'm lucky enough that my dad kind of forced me to be a big reader when I was a kid, and I read Joseph Campbell's book.
Oh, you did? How old were you?
Absolutely beautiful. I mean, I read it when I was a toddler, but I kept rereading it to understand more. And one of the best things about the hero's journey is, yes, it's all just, there's only one story. 1,000 ways of saying it, but only one. But the thing that made me think about it more was that there's always a refusal. I mean, Obi-Wan says, like, hey, you're going to come with me, train in the ways of the Force, and become a Jedi. And Luke says no.
Yeah.
And he goes and leaves. But that's the funny thing about Destiny. Destiny doesn't care about your answer. Destiny's going to make it happen. And lo and behold, it happened.
Yes.
There's always a refusal of fate, and fate will find a way to make it happen anyway.
Yeah, that's the yin and the yang of the human mind. That we are equal, negative and positive, and when sadly, higher than 50% of the people veer to the negative. That's why every movie maker that's ever made now, any movie that comes out, there's a whole voice on the internet of negatives, which is given voice to it. And it's okay, that's a democracy, but the problem is people listen to it because they want to be attracted to the negative. That's all part of that story. And George has said specifically to me many times, I make my movies for 9-year-old children. And he says it's not my fault that adults like them as well. But he purposely centered it 9 to 12-year-olds because that's the age where you're very receptive and where you need this kind of reinforcement to where you're going, because it's tough at that age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
You mentioned the negative. George talks about that in Star Wars too. That's the dark side.
Yeah.
The dark is more alluring. It's easier.
Yeah.
Which is why people do it, because it's easy.
Yes. Yeah.
It's harder to look for the good when everything is so bogged down.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you mentioned he makes movies for kids, and if adults like it, that's great. All adults have a kid in their heart. They were children at one point, and I think it's just connecting to those movies, letting the kid be a kid on the inside for a little bit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Don't give me any crap the next time I buy a Funko, Ben.
Hang on. There's a big difference. Yeah, the kid likes them, but the adult needs to make financial decisions.
Yeah,
the adult bought them financially at a okay rate. So,
okay, fair enough.
One of the other things I liked about the documentary, Roger, is that it really highlighted your ability to make props and scenes and settings look real, even if it was in a sci-fi backdrop. Clearly you did that on Star Wars, you did that on Alien, and looking back on it, you definitely did that with Life of Brian. But for you as a set designer and artist, and as a filmmaker, why does reality play such a major role in the world of make-believe?
Well, I never, this was the first conversation. George came down to Mexico to see us. John Barry and I were making Lucky Lady. and we were converting old Mexican buildings into sets for rum running, and we're making them look very real. And his first conversation with me, I was dressing a salt factory, and he was, while we were talking, they're like, we were all like students. You have to remember then. And he was alone with Gary Kurtz, and he picked up a shovel and he was shoveling salt with me as we were talking. And I said to him, when he said he was making a science fiction movie, and I was very clear. I said, I've never related to science fiction movies, but I'm an avid science fiction reader. And, Dune stands out in my youth as a giant book, and it's real. You real politics, the look, everything. And I think, to me, I analyzed it. I never related to any science fiction movie because they looked completely artificial. They all had terrible sets that people thought they had to show because, it was designed, and they had guns that were plastic and went pip, pip, and they didn't look real. And the characters, for some reason, half of them were dressed in Indian Nero collared suits. For some reason, they thought, that's what everyone will wear in the future. So that was I said to him, I just don't connect to that. And I said, for me, it would be like somebody has a car in a garage and it's old and you keep repairing it, it's dripping oil and everything. Well, little did I know, but when I got the script, when we finally started, I had described the Millennium Falcon absolutely perfectly to George. So I understood his instinct was, this guy gets it. And the sci-fi movies, there's a movie called Alphaville that I really liked, and Jean-Luc Godard, because I spent my whole youth in cinemas in London watching especially Russian and French and Italian, movies. Alphaville, Jean-Luc Godard shot in the streets of Paris with a little camera and made it look like a science fiction movie. And lo and behold, later on, they told me, John Rinsler said, the only poster he's got actually up in the ranch there is the poster of Alphaville. So I realized there was a connection to that. And Solaris, which I know the great Tarkovsky made, it has a lot of angst kind of stuff that sometimes we fast forward through, but he set it on a space station that was dripping water and collapsing, and I looked. I went inside a submarine and looked, and it's just jam packed with stuff. You just wonder how they can work, and also bombers. And I wanted to bring that kind of sensibility so that an audience, when they're looking at it, they're never questioning, this is artificial, this is real, and we went off and shot in a real world. And that was the reason why we used Tunisia. Hardly changing it, it's mostly down to me dressing bits of old aircraft stuff and different things to make it look, and it changed cinema. There's no question that I think that was a part of the reason the audience accepted a sci-fi movie, which they'd never done before. There was no box office for a movie, and that's why Fox would only give George, like, originally $4 million to make this epic with, because they estimated it would make $12 million, the 20th Century Fox board, because there was no history of success in science fiction.
Well, they made a very bad deal on that end, but
yeah.
Thankfully, George was smarter than them, but
it'll never happen again.
Just the fact that those movies literally completely changed cinema from then on. Until you mentioning this in the documentary that you made, I didn't realize Guillermo del Toro got inspired to make movies from Star Wars.
Well, it's much more than that. James Cameron, and I couldn't get to him, and I couldn't get the clip. He says on one of his interviews, he said, the day I saw Star Wars, I decided that's what I had to do, is become a filmmaker. I met Christopher Nolan. He was here at the showing in IMAX of Dunkirk, and I met him afterwards. And because he was quickly talked to me, and he said, "I don't understand. You did it all." He said, "Nowadays they split up. It's some does vehicles, one does guns, one does this." He said, "You did everything in your day." And I said, "Yeah, we did." And I said, "Do you remember when you first saw Star Wars? I was 11 years old. My father took me, named the cinema, the time, everything. It inspired him to become a filmmaker." If you look at interviews of James Gunn, when I saw Star Wars, it inspired me to become a filmmaker. And it's all I hear with everybody. Carl Newman, Gareth Edwards, most major filmmakers saw it and decided that's what they wanted to do. That's incredible kind of history, and it's it's why I support George against all these negatives against him, because he gave the world something that we needed.
I mean, just imagining the world without Star Wars is impossible.
No,
Because,
thank you.
I mean, just what it did for just being Star Wars is one thing, but all the people that were inspired to write or film or anything, none of those movies would exist.
No.
It makes me very curious but scared of what the world would be like if Star Wars never happened.
Yeah, that's
No, thank
true.
you. It would be like that movie Yesterday where the guy wakes up and the Beatles didn't exist.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
that's like the closest thing I can compare it to, because when he
True.
wakes up and the Beatles are gone, nobody understands the impact, whether you liked them or not. The
True.
Beatles had a major impact on the
Yes.
music scene moving forward. How
Yeah.
many artists would not be here today
True.
because they didn't have the influence of the Beatles?
True.
It's the same thing with Star Wars and George Lucas.
Yeah.
How many filmmakers would we have lost out on had George Lucas not been able to make A New Hope in 1977?
True.
I mean, the whole plot of It's a Wonderful Life, just
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
So
Pretty much.
True.
Anyway, so you have won so many awards over the years for dozens of critically acclaimed movies. But I recently learned that you won a different kind of award for one of your other movies. You also directed Battlefield Earth, which was not as widely received as some of your other works. How do you balance out the highs and the lows to the reception to your work? Once again, talking about the positives and the negatives.
Well, that was a John Travolta's had seen the trailer for it was the first trailer actually that came out for Phantom Menace, and by chance I think half the trailer were shots I'd done, and he'd phoned George and said, "Look, I haven't got any money to make this movie with." And he'd seen Nostradamus, my movie that I made, which he absolutely loved. And when he
Wonderful
met me, he
movie,
said,
by the
"Yeah,
way.
I can see. Oh, yeah, you're not afraid of major actors, all this stuff, and the way you did it." So he kind of said, "You've got to do it. I'm sorry." And I was aware that there would be some backlash, but what we were not aware of was the anti-Scientology figures throughout the world who are rampant and who spend fortunes decrying anything about the church. Now, I'm not a member of the church. I went into it with John, because I wanted to know, because I knew I'd be under fire. But the movie has nothing to do with Scientology at all. And in fact, at the opening, if you look at the book, which is a fantastic book, he says, Ron Hubbard, "I know that members of my serious work will be disappointed by this, but I just wanted to write a rip-roaring science fiction movie." And Ron Hubbard was the biggest selling pulp fiction author, I think, ever. He wrote 49 pulp fiction books. And I looked at this and thought, this is pulp science fiction. It's cool, So we tried to make a similar kind of, as if it was a kind of pulp fiction graphic novel put up on the screen, and that's what it was intended to be. And we were slaughtered because of Scientology, and it's nothing to do with it. And it's over the years, I got so many messages privately saying, we finally saw the movie and it's really interesting. And even recently, a journalist told me that he emailed Roger Ebert and asked if he would reevaluate Battlefield Earth. And this was before he died, Roger Ebert. And he wrote him back and said, I did. This is actually a very interesting movie. So all I can say is I think we were way ahead of our time. Many of the negatives about it were people who actually never saw it. They just went along. The LA Times actually printed, this is the LA Times senior writer, that if you dared to go to the cinema, I'd buried subliminal messages and you'd come out a Scientologist.
Oh, Jesus.
And it kind of makes me laugh. So I just feel sad because we did a lot of work and the crew pulled it off. We went to Montreal and I did what we did on the first Star Wars. We formed our own ILM in an old military base and did everything for real. John Travolta himself was on Barbara Walters and he'd never been before. He'd never gone on there. And she asked him what he was most proud of in his career. And he said, Battlefield Earth. So, you can and it's a hugely profitable movie, which again is decried by the negatives saying, oh, it was the biggest loss. It wasn't. It made a lot of money for the original financier and John Travolta. But these things I can say time and time again, and no one wants to accept it because, again, this negative voice comes inside. So, we pulled it off, and it certainly dented my career in Hollywood horribly because, again, the lemming talk goes on and everybody goes on the same path. So, I talked to George about it, and as he said, I don't read reviews. I don't look at anything because when it goes wrong, if you did, you'd feel bad about it, and if everyone loves it, you fluff your ego. So it's better not to look at anything. You just get on with your work, and that's how I look at it.
Perfect.
Quentin Tarantino, it's one of his favorite movies, and he came to the premiere and sat between John and I, and afterwards said, listen, this is the movie that kind of what I'd really like to write. He said, but give me a hug, both of you, because love it, because it's going to take 20 or 30 years and it'll start to be accepted. So
I can see that.
It's one of those things.
And I read somewhere too that there was a sequel planned for it. Is that true, or did that not?
No, that was true because we only filmed the first half of the book. If I could go back in time, and which I don't do, but if I could, I would have made the second part first, like George did, because the second part of the book is incredible action and thrilling stuff in it. It played on HBO. And it played for 6 months. It was only due for 3 months. It played that long. They offered they put up a lot of the money towards the sequel. But the distributors were all like, wow, no, we can't do this. And I think it was too much for everybody to go back into war again with John. And it would have been the original cast.
Sure.
I mean, so when I found out that we finally booked you for an interview, I was super excited, and I've never seen Battlefield Earth before, so I watched it. I thought it was okay. I thought it was pretty good. But then seeing all the negative reviews, I'm like, what movie did these people watch?
They didn't.
Like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I know. We were very innovative for the time. I mean, John Travolta and I flew to the ranch and showed it on Skywalker to the whole of the ILM crew and George and everybody. And George got me afterwards. He said, I don't understand. I said, what? He said, how did you make this movie for the money that you had? I don't understand. How did you do these effects for the small budget you had? And I just said, George, I don't own ILM. That's all I can tell you. I use different houses all over the place, and somehow very convincingly got it done. In fact, we helped to launch Hybrid in Montreal. They did 180 shots for us. They were unknown before that. You probably don't know this, but Steven Spielberg called John Travolta and said, where did you do the ships for Battlefield Earth? Because I really like them, and that's what he wanted for Minority Report. And they used Hybrid. Those ships in Minority Report are my ships. They just closed them with a different look.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
I was wondering why they looked fairly similar. I just didn't know if that was just coincidence or not, but that makes a lot of sense now that I'm thinking about it. But I have a feeling it's, I mean, I don't know how many people are watching Battlefield Earth now, but I mean, just thinking about when the prequels came out for Star Wars, people ripped on them to no end. They got an unnecessary amount of hate, and now they're beloved material.
Yes.
So
who knows?
Who knows?
I just got to get on now and keep making movies and not.
Oh, absolutely. And you've done fantastic everything the entirety of your career for the most part.
Well, I tell you what. Well, since we're talking about the getting on and moving on to other things, let's talk about one of the other things.
And now, a word from our show sponsor, Level Up Sabers. Their link can be found in the show notes.
There was my segue. See that? I did a segue.
Yes.
Woo. All right. So, because the more I learned about you, the more amazed I was by some of the things that you worked on in your past, and I started looking about, into the future to see what were some of the other things that you'd be working on, and what you'd have coming up. So I mentioned this next part with a grain of salt because we call IMDb the Wikipedia of the entertainment industry, and about 50% of the time, it's wrong every time. So, according to IMDb, there's an interesting looking program coming up on your resume called Replicants of Atlantia.
Right.
And I'm hoping that you can tell me a little bit about something about that, if that's something you can talk about, and if it's, so we can figure out how to look forward to this.
Yeah, that was, I was asked by the financier who financed the documentary, Galaxy Built on Hope, if I had an idea, because she wanted to, they were a new studio and they wanted an Indian film and my documentary and a few other areas. And she had an animating film that I was helping them on that was going to be made in India from an Indian legend. And that fell away, the funding. She said, do we have anything to replace it with? And I said, I do. I saw Elon Musk say that he was determined to conquer Mars, but he realized to do it, he'd have to sacrifice a lot of people. And I thought, no, by then you'll just have robots to do this. So I conceived, dealing with climate change, when the Earth is running out, how a future multi-zillionaire who controls the world's power through power cells that he's found a new way to do, finances a search for a new planet, and they found one. And so they take 9 people who could do the job and they replicate them as robots, and they transfer their brains into the robots and they're sent. And so it's fun because they're building this under pressure to house a community coming from Earth to help to save the humankind. And it was very interesting because when I was writing it, and I wrote with a young sci-fi writer here, that these are replicants who have who are experiencing flashbacks and memories that they'd never actually experienced. And so they're finding things out like love. And then eventually they start to realize, listen, why are we building toilets? Why are we building showers? Why are we building farms to grow food? We don't need any of that. And also they have power, that their power source now will be infinite. So they're realizing if humans are going to survive, it's them who will be it, which is kind of coming to the forefront now with AI, with everything going on, that it's a kind of prophecy, really. So it's halfway through. They're doing that in India with a fantastic company in India, animating the whole thing for us. And as they go, they find more financing. So we're in the middle of it now, and then she's raising more finance to carry on. That's, I hope, will get done, because what we've done is so exciting, the vision of it.
It
I mean,
sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited for the show.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. I like the premise of it, especially because it feels like something that we're going to have to deal with in the next few years. So,
It's coming faster than I ever thought.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like I just did a huge conference. They flew me to Hong Kong on AI and Web3. And I had to give part of a panel, and I was with some really interesting people. And I went there thinking, AI, it was partly then because the strike was on and the writers were on strike, and part of it was against AI. And I kind of said, it's probably 4% of the companies in Hollywood who actually take a AI generated script. Like, they make these cheap movies that go out all the time. That probably could happen, and they'll say, let's do it. But most times it's creative. And I said, let's look at this with Star Wars, the first one with George Lucas. So to create a premise, he took Forbidden Fortress with Kurosawa's drama, and there was the structure of the movie. And he took a spaghetti western and he put it into it, and he took the ideas like Merlin and put those into it. And I said, this is exactly what, and everyone at the point said, oh, this is going to ruin the industry. And as VHS came out, oh, the film industry is dead. And then Blu-rays came out, oh, the film industry is dead. And then streaming came out, the film industry is dead. The creative part of us as humans will never fail. And if I can go on now, and if I input correctly the idea I want for a story, I'll get a script within a few hours, which I can then work on. Whereas before, with all of the research I had to do, it would take 9 months to get to that point. So you just have to learn to adapt and to use it. Sorry, it's a long story, but it would kind of answer the question in a roundabout way.
No, we like long answers. Long answers are good answers.
Oh, good.
Yeah. The longer you talk, the more we have, which is fantastic for us.
Oh, good.
All right. But so you've been on the set and around so many high-profile movies over the years, varying roles and positions, job titles, and everything, from all the Star Wars ones that you've worked on, Alien, Nostradamus, and other ones. What is your absolute favorite prop that you've made or have had made or just really liked how it looked?
It would have to be the lightsaber. Not just because it's the iconic view of Star Wars, but I think because it just feels so right. And I have a 10-year-old here. The room is full of lightsabers. He's always having battles, and this is true to so many kids in the world. And again, it's a lightsaber. That's what it was first called. It's a saber of light. It's visually showing you that the light is the important thing. I do like Han Solo's pistol. I think that one was particularly good, and I also like the Gaddafi stick that is part
Oh,
of the Tusken Raiders, and then has now been so well kind of brought to the forefront
with Boba.
in Boba Fett and how its history came about and stuff. So those, I think, would probably be the major ones.
All right,
now,
very cool.
is there a particular lightsaber that you've made that that's the one?
Luke's original.
Just Luke's original?
Yeah,
I mean,
because the
it is
the
beautiful.
the set deck on we were busy. I was making Black Angel, and when Empire Strikes Back, and the set decorator they hired, who I knew very well, was not particularly science fiction oriented. And I think to make their life easier, they put rivets in the T-strip. That completely ruined it to me. That makes a human element in a mystical object. And unfortunately, that carried right the way through, all through. And then I was watching with trepidation Dave Filoni's
Ahsoka.
series. No, no, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay.
Hmm.
And he goes to dig it up in the desert right at the end. And I thought, oh God, what's he going to dig up? What's he going to dig up? And I'm watching very carefully. And he dug up my original without the rivets. And I praise and I God bless and thank you and anyone who can let him know Dave Filoni has brought back George's vision and brought back everything that is sacred to every fan about Star Wars. So I take my hat off to him.
Agreed. You'll
Most
get no
people have.
argument.
Oh yeah, most people agree with you there.
Yeah, you'll get no argument from me on that. I'm very excited to see where Dave is going next with
Yes.
Star Wars, because he has such a keen nose for where the story needs to go, but his feet are so solidly planted in the lore.
Yes.
And he was able to marry those two things together so nicely. And it's it gives fans like me hope.
Well, it does. And here's another, interesting thing about that. And this is, to me, is George's talent. See, George, and I got chosen, John Barry, the ILM boys, nobody actually had much experience. We had enough to do the job. And we weren't conditioned by too much experience to say, no, Gov, we can't, this is how we always do it. It'll how it work. Each one of us said, we can't do this. We got to find a way to do it. And that's George's instinct. And it went all the way through, look at Ben Burt. He was a student when he got chosen to do the sound. And if you look at the story of Dave Filoni, who was working in animation in Disney, and he got called and he went knowing he would never get this job. He saw who he was up against and he thought, if I go and I'm going to sit with George at a table and I can dine on this for the rest of my life. And George's instinct chose him, probably the least experienced, because he saw something in Dave and he trained him and he understood. I think this is part of George's legacy that's never really kind of talked about, but it's even the posters. George took people who normally wouldn't be taken to do the posters. He chose by instinct. And I think that's a very much, part of who he is.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I mean, in my mind, George Lucas is basically Yoda. And then you have Dave Filoni is the Luke Skywalker of the whole thing. And I just,
True.
he's the new hope, and I love
it. Yeah, that's true. He is the new hope.
All right, Roger. So we were at the end of our normal slate of questions for our guests, but we do like to end our interviews on what we call our silly question. Just to see what you have to say on this topic. So last year we asked people what their favorite dinosaur is, but it's 2024 and we thought we should ask a new question. And that question is, what's something that you bought that you instantly regretted?
A used Pontiac Firebird. I had a Mustang in England that I loved, and hardly anyone had one. It was left-hand drive, and I just loved the design of it. This is actually when we made Star Wars. I was driving around in it, listening to the Doors all the time. And I thought, you know what, this Firebird looks pretty cool. And this blooming thing broke down all the time. It was the opposite of the Mustang, and I got rid of it fairly quickly.
I mean, yeah, that would probably be a big regret, but oh my god, that's funny.
That'll start the new year off with it.
There you go. All right. So, Roger, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go and find more about you and more about your work?
I do have a website which I'm trying to get upgraded. It's rogerchristian.com or rogerjchristian.com. That website is up. It's got stuff on there. We're trying to keep that updated. I am on Instagram under my name, and Facebook still, and less on X, which I still don't understand why you have to change the name.
Well, but, I still call it Twitter. Still Twitter to me.
Yeah, me too.
I mean,
it's Twitter.
If you look at the website link, it says Twitter.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it does. So there you can find me there. IMDb is, as you said, it's often way behind, but there is stuff on there. But I guess the website would be the best. It's got the most information now, and I'll keep trying to update it because we'll be within a month. I'll be in Morocco preparing for it's the Black Angel that is on YouTube. The original short film that George commissioned was a big influence on Game of Thrones, and it was shot. The pilot was shot in the same place in Scotland. Afterwards, Ireland turned up and said, "We'll give you studios, and we've got a lot of tax incentives." So Scotland lost it. So when I look now, if I made it in that same medieval, ancient kind of colder world, it would just look like I'm copying Game of Thrones. So I've gone back to the days of Star Wars, whereby I've set it into a spaghetti western, like medieval, ancient kind of world, which is where it would have started originally. And it's part 1, part 2, and part 3 will come if we can get it financed. The next segments of it, and the first one's called Sword of Tyrus. That's part of the Black Angel saga. It's an interesting. That'll be probably more. I've got Toby Kebbell, who you may know. Toby was co-lead in Prince of Persia, co-lead in Ben-Hur. He's, I think, the best Black Mirror, the series. I think his is the best one. He was incredible in it. He's done a huge amount of amazing work, Toby. He was first seen in Rock and Roller. He stole the whole show.
Okay.
And Checky Cario, who's my Nostradamus, he's playing my version of Merlin, who's an ancient psychic sorcerer. And John Rhys Davies, who you will know, who's also in the movie as well. So I've got a very good ensemble cast.
Sounds great.
We'll be starting pretty soon. Again, very low budget because we're independent. I'm trying to keep that kind of philosophy of mine going, whereby everything is real, and keep it kind of not, the American studios make the best. I just, every time we go and see huge movies and they satisfy you, and you get your money's worth, everything, but they don't connect like Star Wars did, nor Alien. When you look at Alien, it's timeless. And so I'm trying to keep that independent spirit going. So it'll be a struggle, but that's what I'm used to.
Well, I'm super excited to see everything that you got coming up soon. And we'll make sure to put all the links in the description below.
Thank you. Yeah, and send me a link to this because I'll get it out as well.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Will.
I'll tell everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey guys, want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to help ensure that we get more amazing guests like Roger Christian here and have great moments for you to be able to listen to and to be able to learn about things like, well, Star Wars, because, Star Wars. But anyway, please subscribe. It helps more than you'll ever be able to know. And be sure to go check out Roger's work on the links down below. He's got so many cool things that we didn't even scratch the surface of. This could be like a running series of
Yes.
week by week, just talking about an individual movie. That's how many things he's got out there that are so very cool. So go check out Roger's work. You won't be disappointed. So yeah, thank you, Roger, for coming on the
Thank
FSF
you.
podcast. And thanks, guys, for tuning in. That's going to do it for us this week on the FSF podcast. Goodbye.
Bye.
Copyright 2024 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.